Summit where we go grab food.
It's right around the corner.
Or if people individually need to go for it. So welcome. Thank you for.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again. Very happy to be here and hope not to be too boring for everyone who participated already in September. Briefly about myself, my name is Christoph. I am born in Hamburg in the north of Germany. I live in Berlin in the east of Germany. I run a fund, an investment fund, public equity for biopharma research and development, so anything before commercialization, basically. And at the same time, I have been in the past trying to build bridges to Russia. Since that has failed, I'm still trying to at least raise a little bit of connections that we have there. And in short, to summarize what we discussed last time, or my perspective on Europe and Germany specifically, is I think right now we're in massive trouble, but it hasn't really materialized. So we're really the worst we're still to see. So on the short to mid term, I'm very, very pessimistic for what's going on in Germany, especially, but also in Europe. In the mid to long term, I hope, being the optimist, that we can actually leverage a lot of opportunities that arise during such a situation to set up Europe and Germany's economy and also political system in a way that becoming more competitive again. And as in any crisis, there will be, I believe, massive opportunities also in Europe and in Germany in the midterm time. So that being sort of the general framework, I believe last time we did like that, I would just run through the topics really quickly, and then I believe we can discuss way more. And since we also have more German people, and as I found already out with Gordon and Stephen, there are people that even know more about Germany and Europe than I do. So I definitely don't want to be the one talking all the time. So just roughly looking up, and I would touch on economics, the economic situation that we face specifically in Germany, but I believe that it's somewhat similar across Europe. And as you said already, like Germany being the powerhouse for economic powerhouse is being very important. Then specifically the gas or energy situation that we're facing in Germany, again, specifically Germany, but this again broadly applies to the entire of Europe, or the EU, better said, because Russia is also part of Europe, if you're strictly speaking. And then about the political situation, I'd also be very, very interested to hear your perspective and how you disagree, or what your view is, and specifically from a Polish view on that. But maybe economically, one, we're coming out of the massive spending era out of COVID, or generally the past 15 years. With having to bail out Greece, which was largely to save German banks, but that's another story. So we've just been overspending, just like I guess all of the world's larger industrial states. So that was at some point going to collapse, and then we are obviously running into that massive issue with the Ukraine situation, and us basically facing a loss of our major energy supplier. Which really what our economy was based on for at least the past 30 years or so. So with both of that, it's what I would call a perfect storm within Germany. And without going into too much depth, it's like, and we can discuss more maybe around specific question, but it's a massive situation. And I don't think people are really aware of what's ahead of us in Germany. So I think it's really, really, really going to be painful, just going through how much energy prices are going to increase and how much Germany is going to have to pay for just to subsidize the energy costs, both for businesses and for consumers, which they've already actually yesterday agreed upon. And in terms of political situation, or maybe in terms of history of gas, just for people that haven't been as deeply involved, actually gas and Russian gas has always been a really important part of our energy mix, primary energy mix. And whilst there's a lot of criticism towards the German governments of the past to have built that dependency, I would say it's a bit more complex as always. A, it has always been there. B, it's largely also due to European policies in terms of liberalization of the gas market that allowed or forced Germany also to sell some infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. It remains strategic mistake to not have diversified from those energy imports. but strictly speaking, also those would have been government spending, strategic government spending that would have not helped the economy at any point in time. But definitely 20, 30 billion in terms of LNG terminals and tankers and some sort of strategic reserve contract with Kuwait or whatever would have really helped us in the current situation. So in retrospect, it was definitely a wrong decision, even though I'm not as strict with our plan. But so we built that, or we are, and we're always in that dependency. Around 20% of our primary energy was from gas, and of that, around 50% was from Russia. Over the past years, obviously, this has dropped massively. Now we've been buying all of the world's LNG resources for the past month, actually through a former Gazprom subsidiary in London, but that's just a fun fact at the side, which caused a massive global spike in gas prices over the past month, really, and caused then a lot of our energy suppliers to run into massive issues, but then had to be bailed out again. And we spent 40 billion on the largest of them. But that's really just like the tip of the iceberg that we're going to have to spend to bail out everyone else. Our inflation now is at 10% just recently, which is interesting to compare with France, because France has been heavily subsidizing their energy prices already in the past. So they basically have flat prices. In France, the inflation is 5.5%. So as a rule of thumb, 4.5% of our inflation is due to energy. And already leading over to this political dimension in the European scheme is quite interesting, because Germany is being massively criticized out of Italy. I'm not sure what the Polish perspective on that is, for having committed to bail out consumers with 200 billion in terms of energy subsidies. And basically Italy was like, this is skewing the economy and you shouldn't be doing that, whilst at the same time, France is paying 10 billion every month to keep the energy prices stable. So we do see a lot of friction in the European Union, I believe, in this situation, just on this energy part. I think even more on other items, but we really do see friction. So yeah, about the energy mix, I mean, we've been spending and subsidizing a lot of investments into the renewable sector. Not enough, I believe, but still, I believe that has helped us. So as of 2020, around 15%, 16% or so of our primary energy was already off from renewable energies. But as everyone knows, it's a bit difficult to deal with, to use renewable energies really as the primary source for an energy system, since it fluctuates in terms of intensity, and it's very, very difficult to with just that source, or with that predominant source, to keep a stable grid and without outages or so. And but obviously we're now spending even more, just like you are here in the US. Not to the same scale, but at least vigorously at the side of building LNG terminals now and getting those new contracts, new suppliers like Azerbaijan, trying to get Kuwait to convince them, etc. The biggest in Germany, in a German debate over that in that context, was how to deal with nuclear energy. In 2008, after Fukushima, we decided to withdraw from all nuclear energy, and the last nuclear power plants were supposed to be closed 31st of December 2022. And now for the past 10 months, we've been discussing how to deal with that. And we have in our Ministry of Economy, we have the head of the Green Party. So who is obviously very much opposed to, or not obviously I would say, but historically, out of historic legacy, very much opposed to nuclear energy. Even though Greta Thunberg said that she prefers nuclear energy to all other nuclear energy sources because of obviously the CO2 neutrality. But there was a massive debate going on until I think 2 weeks ago, and that is that the Minister of Finance, who is from the Liberal Party, was pushing pro extending the lifetime of those nuclear power plants. The Minister of Economy, who is green, was against it. And now our Chancellor stepped in and overruled both and decided that those 3 power plants will be continued until end of Q1 2023, which I really don't understand, because that's really only when the situation starts to burn. So I'm still hopeful that they're gonna take another decision to continue running them. But on the other hand, I don't get why he had to state on that context.
What percentage of the energy comes from those 3 plants?
So that's all of the nuclear power that we have in Germany, and I think that's right now something like 5 to 7%. But I'd have to check up on the precise stats.
Does that provide energy into your chemicals industry?
I don't know where. I mean, it's all electricity, so we don't have any sort of regasification or so ongoing. But so it's all in terms of electricity. I don't think there is a direct link to a specific industry. It just goes into the grid and then is distributed. So right now we have them. I believe we need them, or even need to extend or even build out nuclear energy, at least for the next years. We are fortunate that we've got France as a neighbor, and they are very big into nuclear energy. So we get a lot of electricity from there, but that's not going to be sufficient to catch up on all the gas that is not flowing. Plus, the gas is actually required for a number of chemical processes, both in steel manufacturing as well as in the chemical industry. And whilst it's physically or chemically or technically possible to just replace one by the other, it does require new technologies and investments into infrastructure. And I believe any German small mid-scale company, but also the larger scale companies, are very hesitant to do any type of investment in terms of manufacturing or infrastructure and of industrial infrastructure in Germany at the moment. Sort of no one would state that very obviously, but whenever you talk to someone behind closed doors, they would be like, it's all on complete stop, and even ongoing investment projects have been stopped, and they obviously need to reorientate, but most likely are going to reallocate those investments into geographies where they have a very reliable access to cheap oil and gas. I believe that's again
the US.
I was going to say that's a big good opportunity for you guys. I mean, I still say that if I was one of them, I'd also consider mini and Middle East, because of all the of so many aspects there. But it's definitely not Germany. That's for sure. Just in terms of the larger political landscape, and I mentioned already the struggle around energy or sort of economic subsidy policies. The other obvious part is how to deal with Russia, how to deal with Ukraine, and in general how to deal with defense. And that, I would say, has been quite uniform, even though there is a lot of criticism again and again also towards Germany, because we were quite hesitant in the very beginning. We, I would say, very, very vigorously switched our stance on to supply weapons into Ukraine. On the night before the invasion, so February 23rd, there was the head of the opposition party, the Christian Democrats, and our former Minister of Labor and the head of the Atlantic Bridge, which is a German-American think tank. And both of them stated that they were very, very convinced that Russia is going to attack Ukraine. But they both said, under no circumstances is Germany ever going to deliver any weapon into Ukraine. So that was February 23rd, 2022. And I was a bit like, why would that be the case? I mean, I do understand our historical relations with Russia, especially during the Second World War, etc. But it's pretty clear that if someone gets attacked, etc., the argument is always that we don't want to become a party of the war, and that sort of pulls through. But in a matter of really weeks, we started deciding to deploy weaponry, especially through agreements or not agreements that we had with our eastern neighbors, Czech Republic and Poland, where they would deliver former Soviet materials that the Ukrainian army was actually able to operate, and then being resupplied with German military equipment over sort of the next years. Now with Poland, at least, we have quite a debate going on and how exactly that was meant and so on. So it seems like we didn't really have a formal agreement on that. But regardless of what that is, by now also Germany has deployed especially heavy artillery, very, very capable machinery, anti-aircraft and anti-rocket systems, so defense systems. We still sort of have a very difficult stance on delivering what we call offensive weaponry, which is a bit stupid to my mind, because any of those equipments that we've used there is not defensive, but you can use it in either way. And if you're being attacked, anything is a defensive means. I just love
some of the satire in Israel about Germany and Ukraine. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I can very much agree to that. And yes, last week I actually had the economic advisor to Zelensky at my place, and we had like German politicians gather around that, and even on that table it was a massive discussion around two people from the ruling parties, but different camps, different parties, and they were even having like a very, very intense discussion around how, you know, to deal with those weaponries. I would say we're warming up to and delivering more and more. I would love to see something like a strategic decision, like, okay, we can bear, I don't know, 15, 10, 20% of our heavy weaponry, and we're going to deploy that in sort of maybe quotas or so. Instead of that, it's always when the pressure gets too high, we then send over a couple of tanks, and that looks a bit cheap and non-strategic to me. But overall, I believe the biggest overhang in terms of risks to the European Union is really the economic situation. I have colleagues at our fund that are projecting Italy to leave the euro in 2023 or 2024. I really don't believe that. But it becomes more and more obvious in situations like this that the idea of the euro as we have it right now, having a centralized currency, but having localized fiscal policies, is just absolutely not sustainable. So we have to either get rid of one or implement the other, which is going to be massively like a really political shock to the entire system. And a lot of people are what I would call understandably critical of that, but I think it's just there's no way around it. But that's sort of, you asked me what I'm especially afraid of and hopeful for. Afraid of everything that is coming and definitely coming, and it's going to throw a nuclear bomb that is not going to help either. So on the financial market, what I'm specifically professionally dealing with, but also in terms of political perspective, like Europe is going to really lose out over the next couple of years, as a whole, and that's what I'm afraid of. Even though it's not a fear, but it's a certainty. What I'm hopeful for, both in Germany and in the European Union, is the possibility to really address major issues that we've never been able to address in times when things are reasonably stable or so. In Germany, that's the labor market. So we really have a massive issue with talent. And on the other hand, there's so many people stuck in their jobs, especially with the large companies like Siemens, like Volkswagen or so, where they basically have the most attractive terms and contracts you could ever imagine for. And when we will see such a series of insolvencies and bankruptcies and businesses going out of business, this will free up a lot of talent that can then be redeployed to new industries, to new businesses, and sort of work on something that is actually capable of shaping the future, instead of just being a heritage, like our car manufacturing industry. So that's on the German level, and we're going to see, I believe, a massive growth in sort of localizing industries that we've been largely relying on. Obviously, natural resources is just what we have. Can start fracking, and that's another discussion or so, but more importantly would be defense industry, then things like chip and semiconductor industries, and then anything that is to do with localized IT, so especially cloud storage services, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe those are sectors that are going to relatively grow today, and they need the influx of intellectual of heads of people and hands from these other sectors. And on the European level, I believe there's never been a better opportunity to revamp the European Union construct than will there be when we run 2-3 years into this crisis that is ahead of us, and to renew or modernize the European institutions and specifically address this issue of financial and fiscal policies, the divide of the two. Those are things that I'm positive about.
Can you talk about your relationship to the US and China?
Yeah, I mean, the US, I would say historically has been obviously our major partner for Germany or Western Germany for the past 70 years, for Eastern Germany, and I include Poland especially here, but our Eastern European neighbors over the past 20-30 years. Both economically, I mean, we were very well aware that without the Marshall Fund and the way that we were supported by America, like our Western allies overall, but specifically America, Germany could have never ever been able to take the place in the world that it has over the past 70 years. So that's historically, and I said politically, we until very recently, I'd say until Trump really, we were always a bit codependent. So then this is my personal view. We would always just accept anything that is decided, political trends, foreign policy measures. So we were not really picking up a German positions. We would always, I would say, to explain what America is doing by calling it value-based politics, even though it was predominantly, or at least to a degree, American interest politics, which is perfectly fine from an American perspective. But I would have wished for a more confident, self-confident European foreign policy in that context. But I still believe that our relationships with the US are, if anything, going to grow out. But I hope that they're going to be a bit more mature, sort of more on a sort of, okay, we are partners, but we're not codependent from each other. With China, I guess it's a bit more complex. We are dependent as Germany on the US, we are very dependent on China because we live from our exports, and really large degree of our exports goes to China. And in the same way, we are very, very dependent on a lot of imports from like not only raw materials, but sort of basic materials, just like solar panels, etc., from China. That's not going to reduce anytime very soon, even though I think we're going to try to become a little bit more independent from it. But I believe we're also coming to the point, understanding what the US have understood a little before us, that this is also a massive risk to be dependent on China in the way we were. And a very recent example of that is Stephen and I just discussed that a minute ago. China or Costco, so a shipping company there, wanted to buy a part of the Hamburg harbor. And it's like just a tiny part of the Hamburg harbor, but it's a part of it. And they wanted to buy, I think, 35% or something like that. So really having the decisive say and also the strategy of it. And there was a massive outcry in Germany about that, because of the sentiment of, oh, we don't want to become dependent on a foreign power again. See what happened with Russia just now. And now this has been a decision that our Chancellor Olaf Scholz took just last week, that he overruled all the ministries and departments that were essentially voting against this, with one adaptation. So he pushed down the stake that Costco was allowed to take to 24%, so just below the blocking minority. Plus, and this is something that I only learned also very recently then, it came out that the Chinese government or Costco was basically pressuring Germany and the Hamburg harbor to just use all their shipping through the Netherlands, through Rotterdam and Antwerp, instead of through Hamburg, and basically therefore blackmailed us into that agreement. I like the compromise that we have right now from a German perspective. However, speaking as European Union, I think this is really a very, very poor signal of how weak we are when it comes to global economic policies. In an ideal world, we would sit together, Dutch and German officials, and basically decide, okay, like let's see what's best for our cities, and then exert equal power to the Chinese buyers, instead of just lying there and basically fighting an inner European trade war. Which the Chinese then win on at the end. But it's definitely evolving, both more the Chinese than the American, but both are evolving.
It's interesting because you have, on one hand, you have this country that is the fourth largest economy in the world, but it's getting picked off by the two largest when Europe is the largest economy in the world. So they're letting themselves get picked off by making themselves small instead of making themselves big.
Yeah,
it's an unusual approach.
Totally. And I mean, like the history of Europe, I mean, everyone sees and knows how we got there, and it's really difficult to get out of there. I mean, even Germany, like always one thinks of Germany, but even Germany used to, until 120, 150 years, not be unified, right? Would be individual different federal states as we have today, only that they would be completely independent from each other. Like integrating on a European perspective, I don't know how you feel about that, but also to me, it still feels a bit difficult to sort of comprehend, but it's just a necessity. And as you say, it could actually, free up a lot of power that we could exert.
But also it would make the European Union much more efficient instead of competing with 26 countries to produce the same stuff. Yeah. If you got the real resources of Europe together, you could change the dynamic considerably.
That's very rational argument.
Oh no, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that that's the dilemma. And until they get past that, they're going to continue to get picked off by the U.S. and Europe. And as Christoph and I were talking about, the U.S. actually needs a strong Europe. So we need it to be better. We don't need to pick them off. We need it to be better. So I think that's a real challenge for us, is how do we help Europe move forward. I think one of the interesting points you brought up in September was about Europe becoming Europe, unified Europe, is the young people. Do you want to touch on that? Because that's a big element of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I believe, again, similar situation also in the US, but the political sentiment of the younger generation is really changing a lot. So and also aided through a lot of programs like Erasmus, which was like a pan-European.
I was in Erasmus.
I really,
Enlightened was the only American. The only American.
Yeah.
5 or 6 from each country.
Interesting. Yeah, exactly. And it's a great program. Basically, what it meant is you'd have university students from all countries exchange and go to other countries, but also a lot of other initiatives. Really, I believe our youth and young adults are thinking way more globalized and way more EU level. It's almost like not European, because again, Russia is Europe, but EU level than the older generation is. So I think like time is playing in the hands of that stronger unification, but still, I think the powers of the past are still quite strong in all of our countries. So even though I say that this is a massive opportunity and for the crisis to come for this, I'm also so. But my optimistic perspective is we're going to manage that type of struggle.
One question, Raj, do you want to expound on your question? It was, should we get long and in what? Raj, you want to say a few words on that?
I mean, that's pretty much it. It seems oversold, so we're hovering in equities and corporate credit, maybe private real estate. So curious to we're all investors here. So curious to what thinking.
Real estate, I don't think so. I don't think so yet, but it's going to go down massively again, I think. And there is going to be a buying opportunity. That one I agree, but not as of right now. So as of right now, I would say anything that has to do with primary energy, as well as transformation technologies, for example, regasifications, power to gas technologies, hydrogen technologies or so. That is going to be a scheme that we just are like, it's necessary. Like there's no way around it, even though there's no specific investment program like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US yet. The other thing is defense. I checked it actually yesterday because I thought this question would come. So I was thinking, you know, but they've all gone massively appreciated, but that's actually not the case. They've shot up and then sort of stabilized again. So they're almost at pre-crisis levels, like Diehl, like Kraus Maffei, like Hensoldt, like ThyssenKrupp. And yeah, I mean, we need a lot of tanks and a lot of planes. And right now we're buying them from the US, but I don't think that's going to be the case for a long term. So I do think defense companies are a really good buy. But I'd also be really interested in your view on that, because they are obviously discounted historically in terms of ESG ratings. And I'm just really curious when we're going to decide that defense is also something to defend liberal values, et cetera, and therefore they need to, because right now there's no big hedge fund that can invest into those technologies because of the ESG ratings. So I'm curious when that is going to be revisited, that decision. But if one is able to from their structure, I think those would be really, really good. And then anything, I mentioned this briefly before, anything that is to do with sort of localizing IT infrastructure that we're currently relying on to be in the US. I mean, the GDPR basically forced already Amazon Cloud, etc., or Amazon Web Services to locate a lot of server capacity in Europe. But I think we're going to want to even diversify from that and build our own companies in that space. So, and maybe on the merger, like defense, cyber security, cyber defense companies, that's something that I'd be looking for in Germany right now.
You had a good data center company, but it got taken out.
Which one was that?
Interaction.
I didn't know about that.
Out of the Netherlands. They were the local, every city that had the best facilities in Europe, and they were taken out by was it Digital Realty, I think. Took them out.
Chris, did you want to say
This
something?
company as well.
Chris White?
No. Well,
Well, I for one find it very interesting to hear your perspective about Germany and German position on this. You know, the good news is that Europe surprised all the world with how big the reserve is of liquid gas. You guys basically bought the entire world supply, and there's like 40 ships outside of Rotterdam waiting to be hauled in. So you're at 95 capacity in Europe. So the winter, Europe is ready for the winter,
Yes.
which is great.
Yeah.
And it's actually affecting global gas prices now. In addition, now Israel and Lebanon signed a deal that's really important for Europe because it will be able to supply gas to Germany and other countries in Europe, right, in 2026. That deal is signed and sealed, and the US has become like a watchdog over that. So there's some good momentum there. Ukrainian war, I mean, that's going to be a very dark winter for everyone. All people, involved in that. Are we going to also talk about some of the challenges in Europe and Germany regarding how do you motivate startups to grow in an ecosystem that is not as fertile as the US? Is that something I would love to?
Absolutely, yeah.
We talked about in Frankfurt.
Absolutely, yeah. But I'd love to, because I
your
think,
perspective on
yeah, I think I agree. I mean, you're totally right. It's one of the key aspects of renewing and modernizing our industry. And I believe that the most important part is about psychology, first of all, and that is anyone who migrated to the US 300 years ago has this entrepreneurial mindset. Anyone who stayed in Europe basically was like, okay, things are going to get better, and even though they're just marginally improving. And I think that mindset is still available or still present in regulators and investors and in the entire society and system, basically. And it manifests then specifically in how the larger capital sources of capital are regulated. I mean, specifically the pension fund and larger reinsurers, etc. Me being from biotech, that's an extreme example, obviously, but the entire Boston biotech area is funded by those large capital sources of capital. And in Europe, they're essentially not an expert on that, but just the bottom line of it is regulated that they have very, very low exposure to those sectors. And unless that becomes available, I think we're going to have a really difficult time. We do see more and more government spending on these areas, entrepreneurship, et cetera, but it could by no means equal what could come from those sources.
I know it's so interesting because you actually Europe actually has a lot of innovation in blockchain,
Yeah,
has a lot of fintech, has a lot of innovation in actually consumer electronics, there's a lot of innovation in robotics. Australia is actually really well known for robotic arms. But for whatever reason, I see a dissonance between, I don't think the entrepreneurial spirit of Europe is gone. I actually see a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in Europe. What I see is a lack of connection between the EU and the local governments and those entrepreneurs. There's no fertile ground for money to flow to them. That's what I feel like everybody's resting on like, I'm going to get a grant, oh, $50,000 here, 50 euros, excuse me. You know, everybody's like basically building on, yes, exactly, building on this system of getting good grants from the government, where in the US, I mean, everybody's basically relying on like family offices and venture capital, like funds, you know, to like flow money into like, you know, finance ideas. Many will die, but at least there's a flow happening, right?
Well, I could present.
Sorry.
I want to just, this could keep going for 45 minutes and it will restart again, but you haven't eaten yet. And they probably are quietly eating. Notice, actually it's late for some of them. So why don't we take at least, the people in Zoom, you can continue to, we'll have this discussion, but take 5 minutes, grab a sandwich in the next room. And if you want to ask the question, you still can, but just, I want to enable people to go.
So I have so many questions and comments, and I would love to speak with you about electrification of mobility, which is the whole VW is switching the gears, and it will require the entire infrastructure. And you said that there's no money to be allocated right now into the infrastructure. Finland is leading the way. What is the Marshall Plan for Germany with regard to electrification? But also to the point that you brought up about entrepreneurship. Pre-COVID and pre-Ukraine, EU has had this program of distributing funds, including funds to developing EU countries, being Turkey, being Poland for that matter. Poland grew up tremendously because of those funds that were available to local governments. And that built up such a strong spirit of entrepreneurship. I was conducting my business activities during that time. I have never seen that much of entrepreneurial activities. And that built infrastructure, that built new technologies. The question right now is how the distribution of funds will relate to the new Europe with regard to defense, for example. There are big questions. By the way, Poland signed a deal with Westinghouse on the first nuclear deal. I don't know when it will be completed, but there was
building a new power plant.
correct,
Right.
new nuclear power plant with Westinghouse. Interestingly enough, the most expensive bit, but they decided to align themselves with the US. So that's the piece of information from the last few days. The big question that I have for you, though, is the leadership in Europe. And let me preface this with my personal experiences. So my daughter came one day from school and said, after taking AP history exam, she said, "Ma, this history of Europe of yours is all about the wars. It's 100 Years' War, it's 50 Years' War, it's the war between kingdoms in Germany. How will you get out of it?" Me being Europe, right? So that was pre-European Union. When European Union was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, there was so much controversy, but I think it was one of the greatest achievements of this so the big society and economy. So we were talking about, let's put our resources together. There was that spirit led by Angela Merkel, by French leaders. And now it's at the crossroads. So I'm still hopeful that Italy will align itself with Europe, but we have Hungary. We have Poland with very populist government that aligns itself with pretty much Catholic Church and, populist views. And we have a new leader in Germany. So looking into a crystal ball, where the leadership to take EU into the next stage, dealing with those fiscal and monetary challenges, which are tremendous. But, on a very personal level, I think if EU will cease to exist, that will be one of the largest defeats to humanity, because we will get back to that pre-war stage.
There's a big answer coming to that, so we should probably grab lunch and get back. Or else it's like to the ground because leadership around the
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.